This is Government Matters, the show that delivers insights on federal government programs, people, and operations. I'm Mimi Geerges. Today, we're looking back at some of the most impactful conversations we had throughout 2022. Keep watching.
It really is about bringing a capability to the high-end fight. It really is about the Navy being able to continue to get access to where they need to get access and to really hold those higher level strategic targets at risk, which is what the United States Navy does as they forward deploy all around the world.
The fact is that a lot of the initial research and development for 6G is taking place right now, including in China. So we have to have a proactive and prudent approach to these issues early on. So ultimately, we want to avoid a lot of the issues that we faced with the rollout of 5G. There's a lot of security concerns associated with that, and we can get ahead of these issues if we act now.
As we look at diversity, equity, and inclusion, a lot of times it starts at representation because that seems to be the first thing. And it's an important part of it. However, if we only stay at representation and we don't get to full participation, representation without participation is still exclusion. And what we want to drive is inclusion.
What are the limitations of relying on technologies for intelligence as opposed to human intelligence gathering?
You know, the war in Ukraine really illustrates the point my book makes, that in this age of great power competition, where technology and disinformation so influence the battle space, that our need for human sources, for insiders who could tell us what's going on in the reality is more critical than ever.
There is a bipartisan consensus in a way I have not seen in 5 years that we need to stand with Ukraine, that Putin is 100% wrong in an immoral, unprovoked war, that we need to do everything we can to provide aid to the Ukrainians, economic aid, that we need to take refugees, that we need to provide them with as many weapons as possible. And I think the Congress is going to be committed to this for as long as it takes.
You're going to hear me say a lot about the government being a model employer and how being the largest employer, how we need to really set the standard expectations of how we want to see other employers show up and the kind of impact that we want. And this is exactly what we're doing here with our new voting guidance. It actually expands opportunities for voting, so we know that elections aren't just taking place the day of election. It gives more time, it gives time off for early voting, also for the day of elections, and that's a change here. So we want folks to be able to engage in their elections all up and down local, state, federal. So that's a big piece of it, as well as the expansion of leave for participating as a nonpartisan poll worker. So, and I think this speaks to, you know, federal government employees. They are committed to the civil service, committed to public service. I think, you know, are great participants in our democracy, and we want to continue that. And I think this guidance sets the stage for how we want to engage in that, encourage that participation. We want to remove barriers to voting. And again, we want to be able to set the standard for how we should be showing up as an employer.
As CIO, with that hat on, cybersecurity is my absolute top priority, ensuring the protection of our networks, systems, and data. Zero trust is a principle that posits that the enemy is already on the network somewhere. It is a paradigm shift. Now, it's one that's been underway here throughout the federal government, private sector for a little while now. It's embodied in executive orders dating back to last year. But we here at the Department of Defense want to be a leader in the federal space on this to really move out with our very large enterprise with this new principle.
And why is taking control of the Donbass region so strategically important to the Russians?
I think it's really Putin trying to salvage something out of the wreckage of this disastrous war, because this war, no matter how this next phase ends, will be a disaster for Russia.
We're seeing a number of miscalculations by President Putin. We're seeing his military being much less capable than I think he expected it to be. I think a lot of people expected it to be. You're seeing a united NATO, which is not something he expected either. And that's really, you know, the strength of integrated deterrence is about the strength of our alliances and the strategic partnerships we have around the world. And we're seeing the value of those play out right in front of us with NATO. We're also seeing the potential for great power aggression by a dictatorial authoritarian state, which I think a lot of people had dismissed as a, an artifact of history. It's not. And so that can happen it can happen in Europe, it can happen in Asia. So I think it's a wake-up call for everybody about the seriousness of the potential problems we face.
So we've talked about Russian history. What does Western history say about how to win this war?
We've got to gut this one out. And by that, I mean get the arms in there. And you've seen the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense in there today. This is a matter of training. This is a matter of showing that we're willing to put weaponry in there quickly. And also, frankly, sustain ourselves. I mean, this is going to be a long war. I think, you know, Americans are sort of like the idea of, we're going to get this over in 90 days. We'll bring the troops home by Christmas. That's all lovely, but that's not what this is about. This is a war of attrition, and we're really going to have to dig into this thing and continue to support loudly and push hard, because, frankly, unless the Russians see that, they're not going to back off.
The Islamic State has been degraded in its core leadership in Iraq and Syria. That's certainly evident from the numerous U.S. counterterrorism operations and, of course, through our Syrian and Iraqi partners. But the challenge that we face is the Islamic State is growing in Afghanistan and across Africa. It's alive and well.
So the purpose of the telescope, it's a follow-on to Hubble, and Hubble has been around for more than 30 years. It's brought us amazing science and images of our great universe. Webb is 100 times more powerful, if you could imagine that. So it's going to allow us to see deeper into the universe, further back, a lot clearer, because we have infrared, so we can see through the smoke and gook of space. So it's going to show us the early formation of early stars, early galaxies, and the 100, 200, 300 million years after the Big Bang.
So are we really going to be able to look back and see, like, how the universe started?
Certainly not far after it started.
And we'll be back with more 2022 highlights after the break. We're back with more Government Matters interview highlights from 2022.
Well, the Army's undergoing what I would argue is the biggest transformation in 40 years. And I suggest that every 40 years, the Army has to transform and modernize. It did it right before World War II in the 1940s. We did it when I came in the Army in 1980, and now we're in 2020, and we're doing the same thing. And so it's not just new weapon systems, though that what a lot of people are interested in, but it's new doctrine, multi-domain operations for us. It's new organizations, multi-domain task forces, the Security Force Assistance Brigades. We're changing how we train, taking advantage of the technology, but we're also developing new weapon systems along our 6 modernization priorities.
We, in the Department of Defense, for decades now, have been trying to be extraordinarily responsible with taxpayer dollars and be extraordinarily safe when it comes to cyber and other types of adversarial actions. Because of that, we are now slower than we'd like, and we're much more risk averse than we'd like. And I think the truth is that when you accept, when you design your system against the risk of an enemy penetrating the system, for instance, like a cyber resilience system, it becomes slower. And what you're doing at that point, and what we don't discuss enough, is you're accepting the risk now of maybe not getting the best AI tools or not getting the best AI talent or the best AI system, because you have now made your system so protected against some of these other things. And so I just think we need to do a better job of explicitly weighing those costs and benefits against each other.
Your mission includes the phrase, quote, eradicating cyber threats. That's a strong word. I mean, isn't this really just a continuous cat and mouse game?
It is, but that was a deliberate choice that we chose that word. We want people to really aspire to giving the adversary a bad day each and every day. And if you choose something less than eradicate, you're settling, right? You're not going to contest, you're not going to push back, and you're not going to take bold action to try to address the growing trends and threats.
What does the future of travel look like from TSA's perspective?
I think this is really, really exciting because, we really are at that point now where we talked a lot about, walking at speed, security at speed as you're walking through the airport. I think we're very close to being able to sort of screen people as they're walking, incorporating biometrics, incorporating some of the CAT technology we talked about at the very front of the checkpoint with our CT technology, and then sort of underpinning all of that, a secure, flexible infrastructure. We really do think we're pretty close to being able to screen at speed.
A new generation of computers are being developed by scientists and technologists called quantum computers. They'll be able to do several types of calculations that are far beyond the ability of our current supercomputers to achieve, things like scientific simulation, for example. But the most concerning of these, arguably, is that these new types of computers will be able to break virtually all of the encryption systems currently used to protect internet communications.
First, I want to talk about sexual harassment and assault. Reports of both have increased over the recent years. Why is that?
I think fundamentally we haven't looked at it from two perspectives. One is from prevention, and then one is response. We have to have world-class response, but we really need to focus on prevention, and that way we'll see the numbers going down. We need world-class response, but most of our programs have been focused to the reaction to sexual assault. To truly get the numbers down, we have to focus on prevention, the environment, and making sure that we don't have these things in the first place. And I think that's where we're heading in the future.
What I've seen in the time since I've graduated is the service continue to move forward, an increasing number of women coming into the service. We onboarded the class of 2026 at the Coast Guard Academy not that long ago, 43% women. My class was 5% women when I graduated, and I think that just speaks volumes to the organization, the commitment to providing work that's valued and in embracing all that people bring in all of their diversity, and I'm really excited about it.
How significant is this level of funding for the agency?
Oh my gosh, this is an absolute game changer for everybody who lives in this country. If you think about the times through our history where we have invested substantially in infrastructure, think about building the canal system, thinking about building the railroad system, think about building the highway system. This is the kind of investment that this represents. In decades, there has not been this much investment.
We always say, Mimi, that despite the fact that we're looking for 38,000 that we estimate to be recoverable, every single one of those 38,000 is more than a number. Each one has a unique story that dates back, and it's intergenerational. Family members know about their loved one. You may be talking to a third, second generation family member, and it's as if you're talking to the grandmother.
We very likely have to do a better job of getting people to understand that it isn't like mathematics when you're dealing, where 2 + 2 = 4 in January, in April, and in August. No matter how you look at it, 2 + 2 will always equal 4. But when you're dealing with an evolution of an outbreak where things are changing before your very eyes, then you have to realize that things will change, including recommendations and guidelines.
But you had also predicted Putin would lose.
Yeah.
How do you define losing, and do you still believe that?
He's already lost. Mimi, he's already lost.
So first remind us what the PACT Act is and what it means for veterans.
So what this is a new law that says if you served in Southwest Asia, so basically that big swath of territory from Somalia in the southwest to Uzbekistan in the northeast, with Iraq and Afghanistan right in the middle, and you are exposed to toxins during that period, we now have a process whereby we'll assume that if you have a condition among the 25 or so conditions listed in that law, we will assume that you got that condition while you were serving overseas in that region. And that means that you qualify for benefits and you qualify for care.
Up next, the rest of our interview highlights from 2022. Don't go anywhere. We're sharing a collection of some of the best interview conversations we had in 2022. Take a look. You said this, for 75 years, CDC and public health have been preparing for COVID-19. And in our big moment, our performance did not reliably meet expectations. What happened?
You know, we have a 76-year history at CDC, and yet we've never had to tackle a global pandemic, one that addressed and met almost every single one of 330 million Americans. We haven't had to tackle, while we've been tackling public health challenges for decades, we have never had to tackle one of the size, scope, and scale of COVID-19. So we have many successes that I think we could talk about, but I think also many challenges. And so what we wanted to do with this review is to really understand understand where we needed to be more nimble, where our systems and our processes got in the way of our being as nimble as we needed to be during COVID-19, and then to, you know, address those issues and really become the agency that we need to be for the future of public health.
But how do you know what the skills that you're going to be needing for a future conflict are?
I think it's pretty clear. I mean, I think sometimes we don't appreciate the skills we already have. I've got children still in high school. Actually, one just started college and one's in high school. Those that can do this is probably the world that we live in now, right? You and I grew up in maybe a different world. So we already have a sort of set of skills that are already needed. The world is more digital. We use systems as much as we use our physical presence on the battlefield now. So we're looking for those technical skills.
In general, what's the significance of this Artemis mission? What does it really mean to you?
Well, as we approach the 50th anniversary of the last Apollo mission, Apollo 17, it's been more than 50 years since we've been to the moon, or it's approaching that. So this mission is actually about something very different than Apollo. We are creating a blueprint for humans to do science and exploration throughout the solar system. And we're going to practice it on the moon, and then we're going to go execute it on Mars and in other destinations. So this time we're going to stay and to do science. And Artemis 1 is just the beginning.
So Al-Qaeda and ISIS remain intent on attacking the United States. I think we've done a really good job as the United States government in making ourselves a harder target over the last 20 years. But we have to keep our eye on the ball. And so we're going to stay focused on those terrorist threats, even as we see these evolving challenges here domestically in the homeland, dealing with lone actors and otherwise. But we cannot let the terrorist threat evolve in ways that go faster than the United States government can keep up with. And so we're here to make sure that doesn't happen.
Mr. Ambassador, I wonder what you've learned so far watching this war unfold. What have you learned about Russia? What have you learned about Ukraine?
Russia has grossly miscalculated and mismanaged this war. As the saying goes, they have strategically already lost a long time ago this war. They certainly have underestimated the West. But most importantly, they have underestimated Ukraine and the Ukrainian resilience. Now, when it comes to Ukraine again, they've been proven to be really tough warriors, but they've also been proven to be very flexible and resilient as a society. And we believe that democratic, free, resilient societies will always prevail the authoritarian regimes.
So you write in a recent piece about the report that, quote, we are tending towards overhyping the Chinese threat. What do you mean?
Well, I think China is our most consequential strategic competitor. That's a phrase that's sometimes employed in recent documents like the National Security Strategy. The National Defense Strategy that also came out this fall talks about China as the pacing challenge. I agree with all that. China certainly has the scientific and technological and industrial base and the size of a military budget that makes it the #1 challenge for us. And there are some goals that are incompatible in their foreign policy and ours, especially over Taiwan, South China Sea. However, I don't know that China's trying to upside down turn over the world order the way that Vladimir Putin is right now. They're not using lethal military force as a rule, although there have been a couple of exceptions that are troubling. And to my mind, this is a rising power that is behaving sort of like a rising power. And we're going to have to accept that that's going to pose some challenges to us, but not overreact.
We want Paul home just as much as his family wants him home. And I can tell you that right up until the moment that the president decided to execute the deal, boot for Griner, we were still in that moment trying to see if we could maneuver a way to get Paul out too, to get both of them out. The problem, Mimi, is that the Russians treat Mr. Whelan differently. They levied some sham espionage charges against him. They put him in a different category than what they would consider other criminals. And so there just was no way to get both of them out for Mr. Boot. But over these last weeks and months, we've learned a lot about the Russian position. We've learned a lot about how specially they sort of categorize Mr. Whalen. So that gives us context and information to try to pursue these negotiations, hopefully in a more fruitful way going forward. And those negotiations are ongoing.
And that's a wrap. If you miss an episode of Government Matters, it's on our website at govmatters.tv. And tell us what you thought about today's program. Send us your comments on LinkedIn. You can follow us at Government Matters Media. That's the latest from Washington. Join me weeknights at 8 and 10:30 on WJLA 24/7 News and Sunday mornings at 10:30 on 7 News to stay plugged in on issues that matter to the federal government. Thanks for watching. I'm Mimi Geerges.